Joe?
Oh, yes, indeed. Okay, yes, we are. I was just spreading this thing around. We're live in the saloon tonight. Transparency and Merit with Brian and Judge Joe. You want to call me Joe or JP? I don't know.
Either way, man. I was Mr. Midnight Movie for a while, but we can go any way we want on this. This is just talking about, the cinema and reality. And really the cinema and the dime novel. One of the reasons I suggested that we have the dime novel there is, the cinema was very much influenced by the dime novels.
Well, wait a second. This is called Movies, Myths, and Reality.
Yes. Well, the myths in the movies were started, with, because they took a lot of the dime novels, or the dime novels were really inspirations for a lot of the movies in a lot of the way, particularly the Western. The way, gunfights happened, which they never really happened in that way.
Duck Landis says, my all-time favorite old-time radio show is The Six Shooter, a Western with Jimmy Stewart. There's only 26 episodes. I'm not aware of that. Are you?
I remember that. I've heard of that radio show, and I listened to. I remember one time when I was just it was up late at night, and I was listening to, just tuning in to talk radio, and I did listen to one of those radio shows, and I remember when radio was, before television, radio was really kind of big. But let's get back to the movies.
In just a moment, you'll hear James Stewart as the Six Shooter, just one of the many great stars brought to you Sundays on NBC. Every Sunday, hear Hume Cronin and Jessica Tandy.
Pretty awesome. And actually, there's 40 episodes, by the way. Are you there?
Yeah, well, he's asking when was the last time I bought a book, and I haven't bought one in a long time, but we'll go to the movies. I mean, the first film in America that told a full story was the Great Train Robbery, and that really started the and was that what year was that? Was that 1904? Let me see here. 1903 was when that film came out, and that really began the start of the movie industry, and it was only 12 minutes. And that was when people began to buy movie theaters, or convert. Like, for example, I believe Warner Brothers started as a movie theater, and that was like the first film they showed in an abandoned shoe store with folding chairs. And it expanded. I mean, it became a very popular medium. And then, of course, we got Tom Mix.
Now, Tom Mix happened to be one of he was very popular. I would say Tom Mix stories may have peaked in the middle 1900s.
Oh, yeah. Well, 1909 was when he...
But if you asked anybody in the 1950s, they knew Tom Mix. He was very much part of the mainstream culture.
Yeah. Well, he died in 1935,
Mm-hmm.
but he was I would say really one of the first big Western stars.
Yes, there's a
Actually, he died in 1940. I'm sorry. He was,
Tom
yeah. So,
Museum in Dewey, Oklahoma, says Political Woodstock.
Political Woodstock probably knows about Tom Mix. And my father, when he was doing Real Life in Culver City, he also talked about uh, Tom Mix quite a bit, and
DJ Tom Mix.
yeah, and that started kind of the legend of the Western genre, and he was I believe he was the first person to play Wyatt Earp. Wyatt Earp.
Oh,
yeah, and
yes. And was Boss Ross was he pretty knowledgeable on Tom Mix stories?
oh yeah, he was. I mean, my father was knowledgeable. I mean, he was a movie fan, so he was knowledgeable on all kinds of films,
Mm-hmm.
and like from the beginning of films, he was very knowledgeable. And yeah, Tom Mix was huge, and he was actually the first. He was probably one of the first mega stars in cinema.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, and then came Douglas Fairbanks, Mary Pickford, Will Rogers. I mean, but before them, there was Tom Mix, and he was considered king of the just king of the cowboys. And when John Wayne was just a youngin, or maybe even actually, I think maybe when John Wayne was about 2 years old, or actually before John Wayne was born, he was making films because he.
What's interesting is if you draw, and I'm just jumping around a little bit, but when you kind of think about the arc of film and how obvious and produced those sort of like Tom Mix stories and some of those the earliest film and television, when you think about just how produced and how much value was placed into building proper setting and so much attention to detail had to be done. And then if you carry that arc all the way over to more current times, to like the idea of reality television, it's quite a thing when it's just such. I'm just thinking about the big overarching uh, uh, theme of how things have gone and where they've gone. And a lot of movies too are also kind of filmed with this kind of reality TV kind of design. Just a thought.
Yeah. Now it was a short west. I mean, for the first film he made was The Cowboy Millionaire,
Mhm.
and it was it was actually a silent short film. And the first film that was like really kind of feature length, long, that we know today was the film Birth. I believe, particularly, I mean, in America, I don't know if there's another country, but it was Birth of a Nation in 1914 or 15. I just want to check that out and see the film Birth of a Nation. No, yeah, 1915, Birth of a Nation was made. and I guess it was originally called the Klansman, and that started a myth of the South. And actually, there was I don't want to say a remake, just a naming of Birth of a Nation, and that was about Nat Turner, and just kind of a play on that film. But that's when feature-length films kind of started, and it really put out like the noble Southerner and the noble cause and things like that. And in 1992, the Library of Congress deemed the film culturally, historically, aesthetically significant and selected it for preservation from the National Film Registry. And I don't know how, like, if that's going to change at any time, because the film is extremely controversial and is very, is a very racist film, and depicts the Klan is heroic, when in reality they were very oppressive and a very cruel organization. But that, of course, is the first film, and then we get into the 20s, and there was a lot of swashbuckling. Douglas Fairbanks would come out, and it was fantasy. But the westerns were interesting because people thought the westerns were based in reality, and the same thing with Birth of a Nation, that it was somehow a reality, and it was really a skewed version of reality that was not reality at all.
Well, yeah, and one of the major, maybe I don't know what you'd call it. Sorry, my dogs are freaking. One of the major, I guess, distortions was the role that women played in the whole thing, because in most westerns, a lot of those, the cowboys or the sheriff, whatever, they travel to new cities and towns, and there's always this one woman who's kind of like waiting on her man, or what. It just very just a very contrived.
Yeah, I mean back in the Western days, both women and men, had to work really hard, and they had to cooperate to survive in a harsh wilderness. And yeah, so
Had to give those dogs the old what for.
Yeah, that's sometimes what you got to do.
Right. So where are we at now here?
Well, we're at the talking about the Western, and then I think we'll jump to the gangster film in the 1930s.
Oh yeah.
The gangster film became popular, and that to a degree was also a bit of a myth too. And I mean, the gangster film is still much more prevalent today than the Western. The Western's kind of faded back in history, but the Western, to a degree, particularly the way people meeting out on the street and gunfighting, that's people didn't do that. When sundown hits, before sundown, we're going to meet in the middle of the road. That happened maybe a few times, but for the most part, first dime novels embellished it and then the movies took it from there. And
And just
what
when I look back on those types of films, the one thing I always have in my mind when I'm watching films is what's going on symbolically that might be relevant to the times in
yeah.
which the movie's portraying, and or when it was made. And oftentimes you can almost like metaphorically or symbolically find a lot of truths in those films, even though they may have been distorting how the West was won.
Well, I think the movies, by the way, also have been very damaging for manhood, for males, just because, the way a man defeats a bully is he has to meet him out and stand up to him. And I don't agree with that. I mean, and I grew up believing this philosophy about, fighting the bully and and things like that. But as I grow older, I thought, what a silly and stupid philosophy. You know, uh, to meet a to fight a bully, like particularly if he's bigger or stronger or more skilled than you. I mean, we should be depending on the authorities to stop. And if you live in a civilized society, you know, telling someone, "Hey, man, this person's harassing me, and he's threatening to use physical harm on me." I don't know if much has changed since I was a kid, because when I was a kid, it was expected that you fight the bully. You got two hands, you handle it, you handle it on your own, kind of thing. And now that kind of thing is not. I don't think it's acceptable today as it was back then. So, uh, and Debbie accuses me of whining.
Well, no, we're talking about movies tonight, Debbie. There's no whining in movies.
As well as I was trained, there was always someone who knew more than me. And again, I still do not believe in violence unless it's like you fight for your life, not for your honor. And I just don't believe in that. And I think that that kind of message sent just a bad thing to our youth, to our males. And I believe in learning how to defend yourself.
He does, Debbie. Brian knows how to throw a punch. I've seen him.
That is a skill, and I believe people should be learning to do that skill, but you should only use that skill unless it's absolutely necessary. If I had it to do over again, I would never step outside with somebody. All that stuff to me is barbaric, and I do not believe in fighting. Someone says something to me that I don't like, I will, I can walk away. And sometimes I even believe in running away. And now we're getting into Wayne talking about double indemnity. Well, that's true. I mean, I said you should learn how to defend yourself, but you should always try to keep out of trouble. I mean, movies have they've been bad, I think, on the psyche for a lot of men. Well, No, I don't run that fast anymore. I might have to scream for help. But as I said before, after the Western, we got into the gangster film. And during the 1930s.
Well, wait.
Well,
Let's
let's-
now. Are you?
Are you?
Wait, I'm
Wait,
here.
Okay. I'm going to put myself on mute. Will you talk? Go ahead, ask. Okay.
Yeah, I was just wondering. Now, when you get into the reality aspect of what would happen with these movies, like the mob and I guess crime family, Godfather type stories, was that a myth perpetuated? Because I feel like there was a lot of, and maybe still is, a lot of truth to those films, which is what struck such a chord with viewers.
You know what? Well, I mean, to a degree, it's stuck truth, but I think people like, I mean, particularly like with The Godfather. I don't believe that there are individuals sitting behind corner. Like a lot of people think the Great Reset, that there's something behind the corner of people, all of a sudden running behind the scenes and stuff. I don't believe that anymore. I used to kind of believe that, but I don't necessarily believe that anymore. I believe people have, people come with good intentions, and then when they mess up, that's when they try to cover their tracks, and that's where, in my opinion, the conspiracy comes in. But the conspiracy comes with good intentions, and then ego tends to take over. That's just my opinion on that, and I think that's something that we can maybe dwell further into when we have more time. But I wanted to say that in the 1930s, the gangster film became popular, but back then, the movie industry had a code, and actually, the 1930s is when you started to begin with the Hays Code, and then even more strict was the Catholic Legion of Decency, and the gangster film in the early 1930s had become popular, but the movie industry decided to scale back on that and really kind of make less of them. And, like they had Scarface and Public Enemy and Little Caesar, about these guys rising to the top. And then in the later 30s, you had kind of much more of a morals play about the gangster and the redemptive quality. You had Dead End, and then you had Angels with Dirty Faces and the Roaring Twenties. And these were people that you kind of showed that crime did not pay, and the like. I mean, it was the gangster film. They had developed much more of a moral arc in their film than they did in the early, compared to the early 1930s. And then, of course, we did get to film noir, which really became, I guess, much more popular in the 1940s, and really it took off in the post-war era. And they say the years it started was in the 1920s and in the 1950s, and that put a little bit of reality into films. But then that it became a little bit, to a degree. I mean, if you look at it in a realistic sense, it became kind of a, I guess it could, a little bit. It became kind of a myth within itself, in my opinion, Joe. And I'm certainly much more of a bigger fan of the neo-noir films like Chinatown and The Long Goodbye. And Raging Bull, of course, which is kind of a noir.
Great movie.
Yeah.
We have a little time if you want to call in 310-668-1969.
And you know what? I will actually, and I'll put in our chat room, the Discord, if a few people want to go in and join in on the festivities. I don't know how much that will add to our show.
I posted the link.
All right, I did too. So we have 2 links in the thing. So
how dare you?
How dare I? But film noir, and then we of course had the sci-fi films, and then the westerns actually made a comeback in 1939 with Stagecoach and with John Wayne. Actually, John Wayne's first, first big budget film after doing a lot of grade Z westerns, and his career kind of took off from there, and then by 1947, after he did the movie Red River, he was like the #1 box office hero, and he really put out the myth of America out there.
Next, also, not next, but following soon thereafter were the events in Roswell, and a lot of just an explosion in the 1950s of UFO sightings and the UFO meme, which also, however you want to look at it, may have, had some steam already going because of the success of those early science fiction or sci-fi movies. There was a lot of rejection towards the sci-fi movement because people felt it was such a straying from reality. There's a lot of, people back then, people just didn't want it, but it's powerful, and the idea of film that came through in film really pushed that narrative out there, and you see along with westerns, you can put sci-fi up there as
I mean, in the sci-fi stuff, that also had with part of the dime novels and H.G. Wells, and then we basically had Flash Gordon, which was 1930s and 1940 with the serials, and then after the Second World War, we realized we could harness nuclear power for really awful things, and we thought of aliens, and Godzilla was
well, the idea of the disaster films too. That probably exploded more in the 70s. Big rash, all kinds of right, there was buildings falling or airplanes flying or a roller coaster getting hijacked or whatever. there's all of a sudden a bunch of a disaster for every scenario.
Yeah. By the way, Political Woodstock, Angela has joined us, and yeah, she is from Oklahoma. And maybe she can give us a little bit about Tom Mix, who I believe, is he buried in Oklahoma? But I know that he,
there's a museum.
Yeah, there's a museum of his there. And
maybe she might not be ready to talk. She's on mute. I tried to.
I am.
Oh.
I just didn't want to have an echo. But I put a link to the museum in your chat room if people want to go look. Tom Mix was the it guy back in the day.
He sure was. Now, he was born in Pennsylvania,
Yes.
but, he was such a big.
Also a Midwestern hero. Midwestern families loved Tom Mix.
Yeah, well, like and the people who lived out in the West, they basically identified with him because they could imagine a world, living in that kind of world. So it was kind of close to them. So he was big in places like Oklahoma and Arizona. He was also big in, like the big cities, but people in those small country towns and stuff, they kind of identified with that because they saw themselves kind of in that role. And
Well, there was a lot of novels back then as well, about the Wild West, and then they had these silent movies, and it, gave them more of a image to put their imagination to.
absolutely, and in some ways that's good, but in other ways, I don't know how good that myth and that imagination is. If you take it as a level of reality, again, handling and dealing with bullies, it's, I think, one of the
Well, it's
worst.
the unknown. I think it's more the unknown when you're talking about the Wild Wild West. And Oklahoma had been in Indian territory until 1907. And then the silent movies happened. I mean, just everything just snowballed. And, my family, my paternal grandmother was a James, the Jesse and Frank James family.
Yeah.
So, all these bank robbers and everything, they were hiding out in Northwest Arkansas and Northeast Oklahoma and in Kansas and Missouri. I mean, it was a real thing.
It sure was. But of course, the way the movies dealt with it wasn't necessarily as real as it kind of took liberty and license with that, and making things out, thinking that this is real life, and then kind of wanting to there's one thing of enjoying the film, but it's another thing if one gets caught up in that. And a lot of people right now are caught up in the superhero film, the Marvel, the whole Marvel universe, and the DC, even the DC universe. I mean, and we're kind of jumping around here, but when the first Batman came out in 1989, that really revived the comic book industry, and it really started the phase of the comic book movie. And now that's our biggest sellers, is they want to, can this, comic book be made into a film? Unfortunately, right now, films, because the film theater is really going to be a thing of the past, and I still long for the days, and I didn't live through it, but to me, the most realistic films were in the late 1960s and early 70s, where you really had really true and real stories of real life, where you had anti-heroes, where the person wasn't perfect, where they were a real flesh and blood human being. And for me, the film that really began, that really did that to a T was Midnight Cowboy. And it showed two people that were struggling, and doesn't have a happy ending. It deals with a really basically harsh reality of life. And of course, you had certainly other films that preceded that dealt with things that and dealt with things the way the way they kind of really are, as opposed to what we want them to be. And then by 1975, you had Jaws. 76, you had Rocky, which was Rocky at first was kind of a real, a little bit realistic. And then the rest of the films after that, it kind of became a comic book. And then you had Star Wars, which started the sci-fi craze, and then it died down a little bit. But yeah, so I mean, and then of course in the 70s you also had the cop film. Dirty Harry kind of set the precedence for that, which not necessarily as realistic is and the film was really, from my understanding, the Clint Eastwood was inspired for victims' rights, because he saw he was hearing a lot of stories of the criminals getting a lot of sympathy and stuff, but there was no sympathy for the victims of these criminals, and it was really popular. I don't know how popular something like that would necessarily be today, of course, because everything now, like if they have something about the police, it's all anti-cop and pro-criminal. And actually, there's a film out right now, I think it's called American Skin, which seems to be rather unrealistic about how most situations go with law enforcement and shootings. A lot of times they are dealing with a person with a criminal background, kind of a degenerate. And of course, there are times when the police do gun down an innocent person or do things that they shouldn't. But if you gotta, some things are kind of skewed the way people want them to be seen, and not necessarily how real they are. And I've been talking a little much. Does anyone else have anything to add?
Well, I wanted to also just touch on animation and animated film making. And I heard this somewhere along my research on things, that one of the key moments or critical achievements by Disney was when they were able to make an animated film that actually made people cry. And once they were able to achieve that,
Dumbo.
Well, Dumbo was one of them, but Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was the first one.
Yeah.
And he was able to really touch on the heartstrings, and his films just made buckets of money. And
but
yeah,
psychologically, being able to get the disconnect from reality, for people to apply their emotions to an animated character, was apparently a massive breakthrough in filmmaking.
yeah, and he was, and there were, I almost want to, because there were other people that tried. I forget the guy's name. I think it was Robert. God, now I can't even remember. He made Gulliver's Travels. I mean, there were people that tried to do what who tried to do what he tried to do, and I can't even spell his name, but I'm looking up the
Snow White. While you're looking that up, Snow White, the cartoon animated character, was based on Hedy Lamarr, right? Correct?
Hedy.
Are you talking about the the
The
animated.
face. The face, you know, that was her face. Is it Hedy Lamarr?
That may
Maybe
be
I got the name wrong.
okay, but I wanted to go to this one because they tried.
Okay.
I just thought it was kind of interesting, and we'll do a whole thing of the the knockoffs. Like when Disney came out, there was one gentleman director that tried to copy his style. His name was Dave. I believe it was Dave Fleischer, is how you pronounce his name. But he made the film Gulliver's Travels, and he tried to do other. He did Betty Boop and he did Popeye the Sailor, and he worked for Paramount, and he tried to do what Disney tried to do, and it didn't it didn't necessarily go through, and it didn't make a profit, or at least let me see, because they spent 700,000. Actually, the film did make a profit, but not the profit that Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs made, and that film was of a budget of 700,000 and made 300 million to, and then he tried to do other films as well, but he never reached the success of a Disney. Now, Angela, you were saying, I'm sorry I cut you off. I just wanted to just add that in real quick. What were you saying, Angela?
Well, while you were looking up some information, I was just saying the Snow White, the visual character, was based on Hedy Lamarr, who also invented Wi-Fi. I mean, there's so much information in these old movies.
Yeah. Well, Hedy Lamarr, from my understanding, was, and we can get into that too. But yeah, I mean, she was really a genius. But I wanted to get into a film that has inspired really the conspiracy theory about power and stuff like that, was The Godfather. And and it was just, before Nixon. I mean, before, it was a little bit before Watergate. And now people always think, there are just kind of things behind the scenes. And, there's a lot of conspiracy theories going now about the Great Reset. And I've said this before, and I believe this, and I certainly could be wrong on this, but I believe that these people believe that there is that there is an infectious disease out there, and they don't know what to do, and they're just maybe grasping at straws. But I think the conspiracy comes in to cover their mess ups. When they make a mistake, they know that they can get punished for that, and that's when the conspiracy comes in. It's not that they're trying to do harm, or there's this legion of doom that wants to get rich. These people are already rich. They're coming in with good intentions, and a lot of times the road to hell is paved with that. Anything else to add? I think I'll end it on that, because I think the cinema, a lot of films, they start with the conspiracy theories and all this other stuff, and I really don't believe in that stuff.
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting because in the mid 90s, maybe even early 90s, when X-Files was a big thing, that to me might have been the height of maybe this kind of divide, where there were tinfoil hatters and kooky people who lived in their mother's basement with a long beard, who were,
Well, it's in JFK too.
and then you had that movie with what was his name? Conspiracy Theory, I think was the name of the film. Mel Gibson, maybe. Yeah, it was Mel Gibson, and that then there was that movie, and it kind of perpetuated this kind of like, there was like this fringe of society out there that were into conspiracies, and then of course tied in with Art Bell on the radio. And so it's interesting now that it's such now, when most conspiracy theorists have basically like moved on from what were conspiracies, they've already kind of seen a lot of these stories for what they were, and now you just see like the full on like mainstreaming of conspiracies. So I find it very strange, and but
Well,
yeah, it's
well,
kind of
well,
this is kind of almost like film imitating life, imitating film.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what's the chicken or the egg. What came first?
Well, I mean, and don't get me wrong. There's always a possibility of people trying to cheat and trying to do this. But again, I don't think it's about money. I think it's about they think they're doing the right thing. I think the motivation is that they believe that they're doing things for the greater good.
Yeah, there might be like kind of this sense of also with revelation. It's another kind of popular word in the lexicon right now, and it might be a capitalization of the idea of revelation, like we're being told, or some are confirmed of some crazy conspiracies, but while most people have already kind of seen these stories for what they are. So yeah, it's very interesting, though it almost seems counterintuitive to a lot of the other trends that have happened in Hollywood.
Yeah. But like I said, this conspiracy theories go around, whether it be about the police, whether it be about the Great Reset.
Well, you could go back to the 30s even, like the movie The Women. They talk about gluten in their food, and that's something they're still talking about to this very day. I really enjoyed your show tonight, and I hope maybe you'll just focus on like maybe 2 movies per show, like The Women and Mildred Pierce. A lot of feminism in there and how that played out through, I don't know, movie history. But thank you for having me on.
Well, I thank you for being on, and I think we will go into movie history and films that really shaped the history for its time and had some of the greatest impact for its time. There were, there are a few films that really perhaps even defined a decade. So we will do something like that, or defined a generation. So yeah, we'll look into that. Joe, is there anything to add before we call this one a day?
I wouldn't mind doing a decade breakdown of films. I mean, it's quite a thing. Going back as far as you want, but you could take any decade and really see what's going on with environmentally and psychically, socially, and politically. So yeah. Anyways, thank you for checking out Transparency and Merit. This has been Movies, Myths, and Reality. Anything else, Brian?
Well, like and subscribe, and if you disagree with what is being said, leave a comment down below and tell me why it's Joe's fault. Okay.
That's right. Tell you where to go.
Yeah. That's it. All right, that'll do it. Thanks for listening, and hopefully more people came and listened to our talk. But if they didn't, they didn't. All right, that'll do it, I guess. Or anything else?
Are here. Who cares?